Hello again, everyone. Welcome to this seventh we're down out behind the landscapes, where we're looking into the weird and wonderful worlds of the people we work with on a regular basis. And today's guest, I'm absolutely honoured to have Alex Abbott here, who's director of Dauphin, which is I guess you would describe. Well, I'll describe in more detail in a minute. But mouth making is the top line, right? Yeah. So that's it. So please, can you welcome Alex? Thank you so much for coming today. Great to have you here. Great to have you here. Now, your LinkedIn profile is as follows. I've got the glasses on for this.
Well, I thought you might have updated that.
But it's probably more relevant now than it's ever been. So, working with some of the world's most famous, historical, important, and expensive artworks within public and private display. Earned Alex a rank in the top 100 most influential young directors working in London, which is fantastic. Congratulations for that. With a client list as valuable, if not more so, than the items that Alex works with, he's built up his company to offer services to world-leading institutions, as well as ultra-high net worth primary individuals, celebrities, you name it. I'd imagine you're probably out there seeing a lot now, and overseeing large-scale projects across the world, designing mounts and displays with a solid understanding of conservation and art handling, and that we will all get into much detail. I was looking a little bit at what's out there, and to be fair, there's not really a great deal out there about what you do, which I think is I think just part of the fact that nobody really understands a great deal about it. Somebody actually did this, which I think is like, this is the dark arts. These are the magic. This is the magic behind what you do, which I actually thought that's actually really good in a lot of ways, because it says, look at it's putting the thing on display, and then also making you think to an extent, how did that happen? And that's where you sit, really, isn't it?
Well, it's just funny you use this picture, because I use a really similar one of a screen
really?
when I lecture. Because what is it I usually say? I always say to the audience, what do we think? Is this guy a good mount maker or a bad mount maker?
Okay.
What do you think? I mean, you don't know much about mount making. We jumped to it.
We'll come back to it again.
People always say, oh, he must be amazing, because look, how's he facing? But he's the worst, because you're not looking at him, you're looking at how's he doing that,
exactly.
Which is like the worst thing you want. So we're probably jumping forward to what I was going to answer.
I think this is how we'll come back and forward many times.
But this is what people say to me all the time. They always come and they say, I want it to be as invisible as possible, but I also want it to be really, really secure. And like they're two completely, conflicting things.
But require a great deal of engineering
skill. To be really, really secure, to hold this cup, for instance, really securely, you're not going to have multiple areas of its grip, so it's not going to fold off. To make it invisible, I think will be magic. So it's not like what this guy is doing here. What I always say is it's better to give the eye what it expects to see, because then you don't actually see the thing at all. We're all sat on chairs or stools. You don't walk into the room and suddenly say, oh, I want a bit of plastic with a big metal rod sticking out of it. You just accept that you're in a room, there's a table, there's a chair. So it's logical. Your eye's not telling your brain it's a construction of metal, it just thinks there's a chair. So obviously when you're in the museum in the right place in the gallery, you're not really looking for the stand. I mean, I am, and probably you will be now, but if you just give the eye what it expects to see, it doesn't notice it. So here everyone's looking at this. You've got all the people looking at him. That's not what you want.
No.
So it's okay if you've got a huge dinosaur bone to have one heavy metal rod supporting it, because that's what it needs. It's a heavy item. If anything, you're giving it grandeur by saying it needs this. Whereas if you try and have a client that says like, oh well, I don't want one big thing of metal, that's going to look ugly. Can we have lots of little uprights and things? And stuff? You can, but then you can have loads of vertical lines that are going to draw the eye to it. And you're spending too much time looking at that, whereas actually just to walk in and see it, on a big metal armature, is fine, because that's what the eye would expect. And sometimes
you've queued me up. I mean, this is a
oh, there you go.
So this is exactly what you're talking about, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
But this is, I mean, obviously, there's a huge degree of skill in this one, I would imagine.
Yeah.
You know.
It's like when you look at a mount, all essentially you might be seeing for something freestanding is a base block with some kind of armature or something coming up gripping an item. And then you'll tell a client that that's going to cost 500 quid and they think you're ripping me off. But it's the thought and the effort and the design that goes into it. So here it's just essentially, some cheap cabling. But obviously it's looking at, the right level of cabling to support the weight, where it's going to be positioned, and then also taking into effect the other thing you said about conservation earlier. It's where can we grip it? So it might be that, it'd be lovely just to have one single, cable going up, but then the whole whale skeleton would split. So where else can you grip? And it might be that you don't want to grip in certain areas because it's fragile, so therefore you've got to grip in two other places to make up for that. So.
And would you, in that kind of instance, or have you experienced doing any dinosaur bones at all?
Yeah.
So when you're doing it, have you done it so that you're kind of having to undo other people's work as well in the past, as history progresses and as materials and everything progress as well? Are you finding yourself going, oh no, we shouldn't really be doing it that way any longer, and you're having to reverse engineer things?
Because with dinosaur skeletons and stuff, it's rare to ever have a complete one. It's rare to have one that's actually 50% real bone. They're usually made of lots of fragments. So the mount making there can be fairly simple because people are casting fake replicas and bones, and then you can have a rod actually embedded in that. So the whole thing can be structurally sound because it's just made up of effectively fake parts. But more what we tend to do is obviously not make
dark arts. I refer back to the dark arts.
If it was me, I'd almost rather have the original parts and then nothing else in between. Then you're seeing what's really there. But essentially, how they've always been displayed is still the way to do it. Nothing much has changed too much in how you grip something. But obviously, compared to looking at a skeleton, some of the dinosaur skeletons are 100, 200 years old, and someone's just stuck a bit of metal and drilled it into a bone, which obviously we never do, never do today. So the way to display it is essentially the same, but how you do it is different.
And so in here there was some information saying there was some descriptions. Mount makers have been described as having the skills of jewelers, welders, fabricators, machinists, blacksmiths, carpenters, AutoCAD experts, and artists in their own right. I mean, that's a pretty good CV, isn't it?
And I can't put half of that on my CV because I'm lucky that I run the company and I have people who do those things for me. So I've got a very skilled variety of staff in the workshop to do things.
In terms of this is presumably what's coming into the skill set here. Jewellery, obviously, to a certain extent, our understanding.
So the jewellery aspect would be probably from the brass work and brazing. You're working with metals on a very small scale. Connecting small bits of metal to other bits of metal. So it's essentially how a jewellery would work. I know the basics, and I can make certain things that we do in our workshop. But I'm lucky to have great staff that are really skilled in specialised areas to do.
Where was this one? What was this one?
This is Duke of Wellington. So it's all items that were at Wellington Arch, not too far away, and then they were all going on loan at Astley House.
Yeah.
This was a good example of metal work. We did all the metal stands, and then we worked with a mannequin maker and a textile conservator to then get it all fitted. But it's just a nice example of you're not really looking too much at the mounts here. They were quite stylistic. The designer wanted something that was a bit stylistic, so you've got the kink in the rods and certain bits there. So it's more stylistic than like a traditional museum display because you're seeing a bit more of the mounts. It's not just all acrylic and painted to not see. Essentially you look at that and you're looking at some amazing.
So how long would you allow to do a project like this, for example?
It depends. I mean, that was done over the course of probably a month or so.
Oh, really? That quick?
We had, the metal work through 2 or 3 weeks worth of work. We had to work with the textile concern to get a measurement.
So is that planning? Planning in that stage as well, working with the textile concern?
So there's a bit of time having to order the mannequins, right at the beginning. So at point A, knowing that we could do the metal work, and when the mannequins are ready a month later, we were then ready to insert them into our rods and stands.
Yeah.
It can change. A lot of that, as you will probably know, can be down to the client, like how well organised they are.
Yeah.
So it might be they've got to get a quote and then get funding, and then you might be working on a project for a year afterwards. It might be that they say it's urgent, and then you say, okay, we can start tomorrow, give me the measurements, and then you don't hear from them for a week.
Yeah. And then
you know how it is.
And then when you're working with the conservators as well, you're obviously discussing the materials. You must be discussing the materials for kind of for long term.
Yeah, and this is quite a good example actually, because it had to be powder coated, the stands, and it had to be powder coated in a special, there's two ways of doing it, and one is to bake the paint onto it. And that releases far less gases than you're simply spraying it.
Yeah.
So that was one condition, that it had to be powder coated in a certain way, so it wasn't going to off gas and give out chemicals within the case that could then damage the textiles. And all the rods that they're painted at the bottom, but where they disappear up inside, into the mannequin, there's a metal shaft there, and all of that had to be stainless steel that's not going to oxidise or
Yeah, or shot blast as well around.
Yeah, we can do. Yeah. So yeah, the materials did have to be taken into account there, especially if it was within a closed environment within that case.
And do you have to consider like the environmental conditions that it's going to be subject to? Is not just as the I mean, I'm thinking, for example, oak frames, right? For example, just my basic knowledge of this, oak frames, and 100 years ago we were sticking metal fittings into the iron fittings into those which were not stainless steel, and the chemical reaction between mild steel and oak meant that basically your fittings fell out. But we didn't know that for 100 years. It took 100 years before actually that became an obvious problem. Do you see issues, or are you already seeing issues coming through that are affecting things now and having to go back to conservation from decisions made 50 years ago, for example?
Yeah, so we do get in a lot of things. Go back to the dinosaur example, where someone might have embedded a fake bone, and they could embed the rod in that, but it's made of something that's now degrading, so we've got to replace that and then make something more permanent. And obviously with the materials now, technology is there within museums that they know which chemicals are safe to use. There's a thing called the ODI test. I don't know if you've heard of that.
We touched on the ODI test once before with conservators.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you're kind of aware of what materials you can use, and then you can send them off to be done in this check.
Yeah.
But obviously, it should be something that we instantly know about. So we know that acrylic is fine to use. It's completely pH neutral. It doesn't off gas. And they make it these days, and it's going to last 20 years without any discoloration or anything like that. And it's fine within certain temperature brackets. You can get the fire rating of it. Actually, it is still something that's quite flammable. Acrylic, so it can catch on fire, but obviously not going to be in the heat areas. And with things like metal, it's just learning that stainless steel is a far better metal to use. And then obviously, if you're painting things, it's a certain type of painting method that can not off gas, or you can use other materials like dacrylite that you can paint over it, and there's Krylon, which is like an acrylic enamel you can spray, and that is a pH neutral sealant that you can put on top of things. Okay. So it's being aware of what the object is and how it's going to be in contact with that. I mean, it's not relevant for all objects, but obviously you don't want a metal object touching another metal or metal.
So are you in your workshop tinkering with new materials and thinking, oh, this might do, or are you actually having people manufacture those materials specifically for the museum industry?
No, not specifically. I mean, we will just find things and playing around with it, and communicating things like this. There's like out-making forums and things like that you can discuss. So you might get someone's found something that they've already tested in a museum, and it might be like some household appliance, but they suddenly realise that actually it doesn't give out any bad chemicals, and therefore you can use that.
I mean, we do the same in our industry. We're like Tyvek, for example, is a prime example of it was actually for the building trading industry, and we're just going, oh, do you know what? That's quite good. That works quite well, and within our industry, and Dartec and all those kind of things as well, which are effectively building materials. So you do similar things in that respect.
And because the client might come across and they say, especially more in private work, in museums it tends to be either painted or clear acrylic because they don't want the stand, they don't want to be that man that you showed me at the beginning. But yeah, the private clients might want to be, because they might really want to show off the item. They might want to stop you in your tracks and make you look at it.
But that's your brief, is that's the importance of that interpretation at that point, and understanding how much you need to be seen or not seen.
Yeah, so therefore they might come across and say, right, we want this all made, gold plated and 10 foot in the air. And then you've got to then research, okay, what materials can I use?
Yeah.
And rather than just say no to that client, it's like, okay, we might not have done your request before, but let's find out a way of doing it. So then it's a service we can offer next time someone else wants something gold plated and 10 foot in the air.
So what about this instance here? I mean, obviously it's heavily relying on acrylic, so that you can see. Walk us through the process for that.
Yeah, so I sent you a couple of pictures just to show, because you talk about mount making, people might not really understand exactly what you mean. Yeah, perfect. So I just thought this, it shows something a little bit from start to finish, and the testing that goes on. So essentially, what the client's buying is a metal rod with just a piece of plastic on it. But it's the effort that goes into it to design it to keep the item safe. So the example here was at Northampton Museum, where they have one of the largest shoe collections in the world, and recently redone, and we did the mount making contract there. So obviously we had to look at every single pair of shoes and design a mount for it. The way the designer had it was quite rigid in the layout, with everything kind of all being in rows and grids. So every single shoe had to be kind of completely parallel, perpendicular to each other. So to get all those positions right, he was looking at every single shoe, designing a mount or a shape, that can fit underneath it.
Bespoke to that one.
Yeah, each mount was made bespoke to each shoe, and I think there were about 300 pairs. Each mount I would go and assess the shoe and take a measurement, and then we'd make something like the acrylic shape here, and then that's all. We don't mass produce things because obviously everyone is different, so there's no point having a huge CNC machine or laser cutter that can just cut me, 300 of these in a second.
Yeah.
It's all old-fashioned artisan hand skills.
Yeah.
So individually shaped and then sanded down so there's no sharp edges and polished. And then it's mocking them up with the shoes. So you've got some kind of jig example with all the different holes there. So we could get all the spacings exactly right between each shoe. So each shoe would take up a roughly similar area, so that when we did go to a museum, they would then all appear completely in line. So we're doing all that calculation before we go to the museum, and then all we've got to do is drill a hole in the museum and put the shoe in, and it looks simple, but it's all this kind of unseen work that goes into.
I'd imagine there's quite a lot of work in that particular instance, which is
So if you want to go back, so you can see they're all kind of completely grid-like, all completely on show. Each one centered, so you might have one shoe bigger than the other, but it's making sure the middles of those all align. And then, it's just, you don't want to make one rod higher up, so it then looks like they're not in line. So all the mounts have to be in line, and then all the shoes have to be in line. So, it's a fair bit of work.
It's a fair bit of work.
But it's the unseen stuff. And what that means is someone just walks in and they just think, wow, look at all those cool shoes.
Yeah, which is going back to that first picture again.
You'll tell someone.
They're not going, wow, look at that cool guy. They're going, well, what's that? And that's your interpretation. You're doing the opposite of that. So they are going to look at those cool shoes.
Yeah,
They're not going, oh, look at the cool way he's got those
shoes. And
also,
the sounds, and they'll be like, what sounds? And I'll be like,
I was never here. The dark arts. And so I was looking at some bodies that you might have been part of, for example, and the IMF obviously came up as one, and so I'm assuming it's not that IMF, is it? Yeah,
well,
but it kind of is. I don't know if you can see it online. It's from Mission Impossible. I'd imagine that it's.
It takes back to an idea I said before, where I want it really, really secure, but visible. It's two conflicting things.
It is that, but this is the actual one there, isn't it? Yeah, and are you a member of that one?
Yeah. So I've contributed to a few posts and things like that.
Yeah.
I mean, there are people that are active and on it all the time. Like I said, just saying before, my social media presence isn't very good. I'd like to be more involved and do more of these kind of things.
You're a victim of your own success.
I'm too busy sorting out Mission Impossible.
So what would be I don't know, what would be the most intricate, how do I describe intricate, delicate piece that you've had to you've had to do. I'm sort of I'm thinking about this.
Oh yeah, that was a good example.
Kind of thing here. Would be something that's delicate.
Yeah, I guess you get different categories of delicate, because there will be, you know, things like this, like you know, minerals and fossils and crystals that are hundreds of thousands of years old, or archaeological findings where someone's bringing you an Anglo-Saxon sword and it's just a piece of rust that if you sneeze it will disintegrate. So yeah, you have to be really careful with that. Obviously, then there's delicate, that it might be it's a brand new item, but you know it's worth 50 million pounds, and you know it's highly nice polished metal, and if I touch that with a finger, it's going to tarnish.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's different levels of delicacy, but obviously something like this is quite a nice example again of a bit of the unseen work and what goes into the planning of the mount making, because essentially all I'm selling someone here is just an MDF block with a bit of filler in it. But what you get...
I didn't want to say.
Yeah. But if I just showed you that picture, you know, and I tell you that's worth X amount of money, you might appreciate it, but it's the stage of leading up to it. And obviously part of the work is being completely, you know, we don't want to be intrusive, we don't want to drill a hole in something, you know, we don't want to grip it and hold it under so much tension it's going to crumble.
How do you know? I mean, there's your first piece of, what is that, quartz?
Yeah, it's a whole mix. I think it's agate and quartz.
So that's never really been handled or dealt with before. So how do you know where the tensions are? Where tensions are?
I mean, sometimes you don't. You know, we will have to say to a client that we will handle this and we will do it, but it is at your own risk.
Yeah.
You know, we've got no idea whether there could be some previous damage or anything like that. But that's kind of the same a little bit across the board, because you might get some ceramics in and you'll say, is there any restoration? And you might not know what something is, how someone's been tampered with. You know, something that appears in one condition might be really delicate because it's been restored 100 times, and some restorer might have done something with a chemical that we now find it's going to unstick at some point. So yeah, you can kind of look at it and you can feel where the weight is. I guess getting a sense of the centre of gravity. So I don't want to recess it in that point and the whole thing wants to be, you know, pulling to one side, because then it's going to break itself. So it's finding the centre of gravity that it would actually stand normally in that point. Yeah. And then all I'm creating around it is a little cup, you know, that it's going to sit into. Yeah. And then it's completely reversible, because we can just lift that item in and out. So it's not glued or anything like that. It's a completely reversible process.
So presumably there's a lot of calculations. There's a good degree of engineering in this whole thing.
Yeah, I think it's half engineering and half winging it. And again, that's where I'm lucky to have some really great staff in the workshop.
Well, kind of just holding it and letting go and see which way.
Well, yeah. a little bit Heath Robinson with, you know, mocking up. We've got lots of like what would be like chemistry test tube holders. So, you know, that we will open the arms and put foam in and then tighten around to hold an object while you know, a moulding or something like that might set around it. You know, we might make several like dummy stands to test it in. So it might be that we've made some kind of MDF mock-up and we sat it in there to get the right shape, realise it's not going to work, have to make another one, and then we finally replicate that in the end medium. Yeah. And the client doesn't realise, you know, what they're paying for is essentially 5 mats, because you've had to make it that many times to then get it right. Yeah. So yeah, I'd say it's 50% luck and 50% skill. But with that is experience, you know. Like what I say about clients asking for different things means that, you know, it's not your first rodeo. I've seen a lot of crystals, so we know how to approach it and we've learned from mistakes. So if something has happened to break, you know, obviously that rarely happens, you know, touch wood, but these things happen. You're handling, you know, rare and valuable artworks. But if you can then learn from what you did last time, and then the client says, oh, I want this displayed in that way, you can think back and think, oh, well, I did that with that, but that was a golf club. This is a crystal, but the same principle would work. So you're kind of learning as you go as well.
You've got weight, you've got gravity.
Yeah.
You know, they're the things that you're really sort of working against.
Yeah.
And then obviously, you've got interpretation. I'd love to just sort of explore a little bit more this interpretation thing and how you approach that in terms of you know, if we go back, or even just here, I mean, this is you can just use this example. Okay, yes, it's an MDF box.
Yeah.
But it's now an aesthetic.
Yeah.
As well. It had just sitting it as it's done right now has its aesthetic. You've created that aesthetic, or you've had that as a brief in that particular instance?
It can be the whole spectrum. Sometimes people just say, look, here's the crystal, do whatever you think. sometimes people, you might not even get the artwork. They'll just say, I want a stand and something's going to slot into it that's, 50 by 50 mil, make this in this colour. So it's the whole, as long as they're paying the bill, I'll make them whatever they want. But ideally, it's nicer when you can collaborate with the client, and usually because it's artwork, they want to be involved. So, it can be as much as, we'll visit the house together, we'll look at where it's going to be displayed, what the lighting might be like, the conditions in the room. Are they going to have a dog or a kid that's going to run up and pull it over?
This is,
all that in.
I think this is what we were kind of touching on earlier on to some extent as well. We're saying art consultancy to an extent, because art consultancy is not just about the buying and selling of art, etc. It's a much bigger. It is that whole aesthetic. There is that whole consideration. Because I do the same when I go into properties, and we're consulted on experience. We're consulted on if somebody wants like an Edwardian hang or a Victorian hang, or they're not going to be able to put the artwork where they necessarily think they can put the artwork. It's, in a way, that aesthetic is the client's relying on you. You talked about lighting, you talked about positions. I think that one of the things that's quite important and different here to some of our guests is in every other instance when we've talked about artwork, we've mostly kind of thought about 2D artwork as being 2D. And I think you get a strong impression that Alex really is dealing a lot with objects, not just 3D, in terms of sculptures, but actually.
The way I describe it is with how you take a painting to a frame is you take an object to us,
Yeah, exactly, and that object is well. There's a prime example of it right there, of what are the shoes or anything like that. There's more than just what people immediately think of.
It can be anything and everything.
It can be everything and anything, and I think that's what really fascinates me a lot about your world, is the fact that the challenges are enormous.
But essentially, what you said earlier, we are then creating art, so people will come to us, to help sell those things. So we might work with, the client who's bought it, but also we work with suppliers and things who are, antique dealers and galleries to help sell something. So the whole thing of display is to make it more enjoyable, either for the person, or saleable. So you're making something more of a product, more of a piece of art. So that becomes something that otherwise, where would you put it? It would just fall over, it would rock around. Then it becomes something sculptural, something very artistic.
Exactly. So you become part of the story of what that object is, and I think that's a hugely important thing. We collaborated on this, didn't we? This is an example from a couple of years ago, where a sculpture came in from I think it was South Africa that it came from, and the client wanted it displayed in this black infinity pool overlooking the countryside, and so naturally, who do I get on the phone to and say help? Right. We've got to, and we had some great conversations about it. It's a lovely simple. It ended up being a really simple kind of acrylic base, which just sat under the existing base that's there, and then all stainless steel. But you really brought to the fore some questions that I probably wouldn't necessarily even thought about asking, which is, are we looking at materials that can survive the winter? If this frosts over and ice is, X number of years later, what's going to happen with that? So in that instance, I'd guess there's probably a little bit more engineering and experience going into that, rather than just going, I think we'll make it that big.
Well, yes, you think you've seen everything, and then someone tells you to make them out, but it's underwater.
It's underwater, I like to challenge you.
Well, the added parts that some of the things we're going to make it out of essentially float as well. So
that was also a problem in a certain sense too. It absolutely was. In terms, I'm going to just look at some of the actual. Did you look at the questions?
Very briefly, So I've done
that thing again where it sounds like we're meant to just touch on the subject and half an hour later. I haven't even got around to question number one yet. Let's go to question number one, which is the job that you are doing what you always wanted to do?
No. I didn't even know it was a job when I was younger.
That's brilliant. So what did you want to do?
I'll be a rock star.
Didn't expect that. It's kind of far away then.
Arty, creative.
Hang on a minute. Does that mean you've actually got a guitar at home? You've made your own stand for a guitar?
I've got a Shopboard stand for my guitar, but I bought from my son a mini guitar that didn't fit a Shopboard, so I have made a stand for that. Yes.
There you go.
And I've made stands for lots of guitars over time as well.
So when you've worked with celebrities, have you made any guitar stands for them or anything that's connected to their world?
I guess one that I could.
An Oscar.
Yeah, displayed some Oscars.
Oh no, have you really?
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah, whole collections of trophies and things.
Seriously?
Yeah. And I did a guitar stand, one I can talk about because it's on public display. There's Susie Quattro's bass guitar at Chelmsford Museum. That was a really cool pink paisley bass guitar. And also that the guys in the workshop are very excited about was we had her leather catsuit.
Oh yeah.
So we had to display that. So that was some of their, being a little bit older than me, that was more their generation. So they were very excited to have some Susie Quattro items.
So, I mean, in terms of that, I'd imagine when you're talking to them to all these places, you've probably pretty much been to pretty major houses around
the
world.
Yeah.
I'm not going to ask you any more about it. Don't worry. It's fine. Don't worry.
Well, I think that was one of the questions you were going to ask about. Is it that people understand what it is that I do?
Well, so you did read them there.
A little bit. Yeah.
I did indeed send you those questions. I'm trying to find that particular one and thinking, oh no, this is more interesting. I think I'll ask you this one instead. So what's the tool that you always carry in your toolbox, no matter what project you're working on?
My calipers. It's essentially what I am as an expert measurer.
Can you explain to the younger members of the audience what calipers are?
Yeah. So they are an adjustable device that can measure around things. So you'll have two arms which are adjustable, and you'll have a readout that will give you the distance between the gap. So if I want to get the diameter of this cup, I could expand it and then contract it around it, and I will get a reading that tells me the exact diameter. So obviously, everything that we do, when we look to grip around something, we've got to measure everything. I guess because with our work, we work in a number of ways. It's always ideal if we can have the item at our workshop, because then, we can adjust and shape things exactly to fit the item.
Yeah.
But obviously, in kind of 50% of the cases, or maybe even more, we can't have the item for reasons that it's still on display, or it's too valuable, or it's in a different country. Then it's calipers out, take as many detailed measurements as you can to go away and make it, to then come back to fit it.
You don't take calipers when you go out to museums, do you?
I don't go to museums, it's a busman's holiday.
I'm always, whenever I go to museums, I'm always forever looking around the back and looking at guys.
Yeah, I'm that guy, the security guards looking at
Exactly. Okay, then, I mean, you've touched on some of these things, so we may have touched this, I don't know. What is the biggest problem that you and your team have had to solve in the last year?
That's a good question. Kind of the way we work, the kind of different things we do are, we do sell like ready-made stands, so that's a part of the business that just, it's like a mail order business. People will phone up and order X amount of stands for, plates or book stands, and that's a relatively simple process. Then we have, one-off bespoke commissions where people will say, right, I just bought this at auction, how do I display it? Or the other kind of strand of the business is bigger museum tenders that we will win when a new museum or new gallery is being put on, and they will put out to tender, someone to display all the objects. So those last two things are really where it is problem solving, because you might have a client that's bringing you something, like this example, and we're working together on it. But then I guess the bigger ones are when it is a whole museum and suddenly you've got 1,000 objects. So one that was good in the last year was what was good for the company is one last year that I didn't have to be involved in, which is really nice, because it being my business, most things I have to go and assess, because I'm the one that kind of, I guess, has the design knowledge and the workshop knowledge that can then feed it into the workshop and see it all the way through. So I've got great staff that will make it, but they might not necessarily be the ones that can design it. So usually I'm the one that has to go to the museum, meet with the client, measure everything, then tell the workshop what to make and then bring back. But now I've had some staff that have been with me for so many years, you know, they've picked up on what we do. So there's a really good project we did for Poppy Scotland. So where they make all the poppies for Armistice Day in Scotland, and they wanted to display bits of the history of the factory and people that make them. And that was one where I did for a company who I've done lots of work with, and they were desperate for us to do the job, and I was like, I can't, I'm just too busy. But then I did say to one of my colleagues, I said, look, are you confident to go up and do it all yourself? You know, because otherwise I'm going to say no to this job. And he said, no, I'll go up and try. So that was a really good one, because I never even went to the museum, so I didn't have to go at all. So that was good and something I was quite proud of him for doing, because he went up there, you know, taking all the knowledge that we'd learned by, you know, making various mounts together, and he was able to do some of the bits that I would normally do. So that was a nice thing, because it kind of released me out of a bit of the work, and that's the first time we've done.
So in that particular instance, then, would he have had his own interpretation, or will we
we discuss a lot of the items, so you will get an object list ahead of time, so we'll discuss things and I'll look at that and say, okay, that's the cut you're going to need to count as, you know, this is how I display it. But also you've got to talk to the client and see what they want. It's a bit about going back to the stages we talked about before you make something. You know, it's combining what the client wants and what's actually realistic. So it might be, okay, that the designer has drawn one thing, that's completely impossible, you know, we think it should be this way, but equally we need to talk to the curator, because we need to know what the front is, or if it's an item that would have been used, we don't want to show it how it would have been used incorrectly. So with map making, it's not just displaying it, it's also kind of telling the story of the item. So you've got to combine what the designer wants, what the curator wants, and what's actually possible. So yeah, we sat down and went through each item and had our ideas, but then it was also to get him to go with the client and get their ideas, and then he also might have some ideas on the day where you suddenly look at something and think, actually, now I've seen the item, it could be this way and not that way. And then there's still time.
So has that given you kind of like that sort of slight release on that? Has that given you the ability to step back and be a little bit surprised with what other people might interpret and put into it?
Yeah.
Actually, you know what? That's quite good. I might not have done that.
And that's what we need to do, because you can't be everywhere at once. So it's great to pass on that. So that's the staff. And then you do get new ideas and things like that you might have thought of.
So there's always in everything. It might be invisible, but there is interpretation in it as well. I find that fascinating. What in the art world has surprised you lately? I'm going to jump out and quite generic in the art world, but you can focus in on anything that you've been dealing with.
Yeah, because obviously, you know, we still do work with a lot of paintings and a lot of artists. So going back to that example of the crystal, and you say we've made a piece of artwork, we do get artists that are making things and they come to us. And in some cases, we're actually making their artwork for them, you know, to display, or at least a stand that forms part of it. So yeah, we're kind of in the art world and also the antique world and other things. But,
so you're part of the artist making process.
Yeah, it's so weird, because you can be in the art world one day, but then you could be in the geology world the next day, and then with antique dealers the next day. So we did. Well, there was a good. We did a lot of work for Frieze and Frieze Masters in London recently. I think it was October, wasn't it? And there's a really interesting Guardian article about essentially how uncreative all the artwork was. This reporter just felt it was really, you know, there wasn't anything original.
He wasn't feeling it.
Yeah. It's kind of it's kind of interesting, because you're so involved in the processes of setting things up. I walk around the fair and I think, oh, this is fantastic. I can see all my maps. It's really good. And then to see someone essentially saying something like negative about it was really interesting, because they were saying, you know, that essentially has the art world become a little bit less creative, because you need to make a product that's saleable to make money. And the instance they gave was, you know, Damien Hirst years ago was cutting up a shark and making a weird display, but now he's back to painting canvases of flowers. So is it that people are losing out a little bit on creativity? Because you need to make essentially a product that people will buy. So this is where the art world can be interesting, because, you know, essentially you need to sell a product for a lot of money. If you're an artist that has spent 6 months or a year creating something, you need to sell that for at least, you know, even if you're an unknown artist, if you spent a year making something and you could have earned £30,000 in that time, you need to sell your artwork for that. So you need rich people to be able to afford to buy these things. But then at the same time, you still need to make something that's saleable. So it was just talking about, has art become such a luxury and a saleable commodity that now people don't risk making anything too edgy, because then it wouldn't sell. And I thought that was a really interesting thing, because you do just walk around these fairs.
It's a huge dichotomy that artists have they face on a regular basis about I've got to survive, but I also need to express myself and continue and keep going, and maybe that expression isn't.
And you do walk around these fairs and you think, oh, that's exciting that I worked on that Picasso and I worked on that, but then actually you forget they are a little bit samey. So is there lacking a creative edge?
Well, maybe that's comes back to the presentation.
Yeah.
As well. Maybe
that's where the template thing made out gold.
Yeah, exactly. A template.
Or put it under water.
Exactly. That just might do it, and suddenly freeze my.
Well, that's what's nice to say about materials and things. Again, it is when someone has approached you and they want something different. So there's an artist I'm doing some work for at the moment, where she wanted something actually completely encapsulated in acrylic, which is something we haven't really done before. You can send it off to these people that make like paperweights, and encapsulate something. But what she wants is really different. And I told her it was kind of impossible to do it the way we wanted, but she was happy to experiment a bit. And we did come up with a method to encapsulate it with a mirror behind it to give the effect that she wanted. So she's essentially done these little paintings, but what's around it is this kind of interesting acrylic contraption that then it's more than a frame, it becomes part of the artwork. And through her willing to say, okay, here's some bits of artwork that if it goes wrong, experiment on, to come up with a method, is really nice, because then you have created something with someone, and then that is something a bit different, that there won't be any other examples of an artist using the method that she's using. So I guess we can provide that creative edge to all artists that are out there listening.
Precisely, yeah, exactly. But on that though, I mean, obviously you use acrylic's a great material to use. So do you not have concerns over like where we are in this day and age, and sort of the idea of sustainability? And
definitely.
So, does that have a bearing at all as well, and on how you approach?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm well aware of the fact that we use plastic, which has a bad name.
Or chemicals as well. Or it sounds to me like you do a lot of reduction in there to try to reduce as much as possible.
Definitely. And we're a big green workshop. We have all our power is off grid. We have solar panels on the roof. Our heating comes from a biomass burner, which is on the farm. But I'm aware we use plastic. But what we try and do, and what companies should be doing, is it's not something that's a throwaway product. We're making a really great artisan product, handmade. So it should be something that you should keep forever. So it's kind of just make something quality that doesn't need to be thrown away, and then it's not problem solved, But if you can try to make these things well and constructive, then it's not a throwaway product. Obviously, acrylic is recyclable, and you can recycle it. But we'll steer people away to other materials as well, like metals and other different finishes. So you can provide the whole spectrum. So originally the company was very acrylic based because that's what museums wanted, but from having private clients and them asking for different things.
And have you had museums as well coming back and asking those questions? Because certainly that's when it comes to tender
it's something I put in our tender. It's never asked, but I always like to put in at the end a little paragraph saying sustainability, that we, like I say, the power comes from solar panels, we recycle our acrylic. Offcuts we sell on eBay, and I've donated to local schools and like hack spaces to give them offcuts.
So nothing's left unused.
So I'm trying to.
Well, that's great.
As much as possible. And I think people sometimes will say that, you sent me something with loads of packaging in. Isn't this wasteful? And it's kind of like, but if that item arrived damaged and I have to send it twice, that's a far bigger carbon footprint. And as long as you don't throw away that packaging and you reuse it, it's nothing that's done. So it's not as simple as switching materials. Looking how you use it and just make things properly from the start would save a lot of problems.
So you're director of your company. How long has the company been going?
So the company was set up in 1986, which was the year I was born. So I didn't run it from day one.
That would have been good.
No, so I took the company over with a business partner about coming up to 10 years ago, and then I was running it for a couple of years prior to that anyway. So I was lucky enough to get a job at the company, and it was a very small kind of family-run business, and the director had been looking to sell it for a number of years. He was already in his 80s when I started working. And when I kind of came for an interview, I thought this was a really interesting business, and coming from a bit of a marketing background.
And it's a career path to rock star.
Well, exactly. I've given up on those things. But I'm still trying in my spare time. So then I kind of it's kind of one of those instances where he probably should have sold the company 10 years earlier, because it was kind of 2 steps forward and 3 steps back. So I was kind of learning from him, and it got to the point where I was like, this business has great potential, but to take it forward, it needs to be mine. He taught me a lot of things, sometimes what not to do, but also how to run aspects of the business. So originally when I first started, it was just in marketing to get new business in, and then I would get new business in. But then I would pass it on to him, and then it would take him a while to get the quote ready and then to feed it into the workshop. So then I was kind of like, well, you teach me how to do the quotes, and then I can get the new business in and I can quote for it. But then it would be accepted, but then it wouldn't be fed into the workshop for a while. So I was like, well, why don't you teach me how you design it? So eventually I could take on all the processes so that he could essentially, semi-retire with me running it. But then I was like, well, there's no point in me still having an ultimate boss. That's, so I found the investor that was willing to give me the money to buy it out and split it with business partners. And that was just over 10 years ago.
And how are you finding the work-life balance and that whole thing? 10 years into it. Running
that's hard. Especially with 3 kids as well, all young kids. It's good in some ways and bad in others, because it was like what we were saying before we talked. When it's your own company, you could essentially take as many holiday days as you want, and you could come in and out when you want. But when you run your own company, you've constantly got to be there. Work-life balance is always hard. I was fortunate enough that I took over the company in my 20s before I had children, so I could work longer hours and put in a bit of effort then. And I was obviously very fortunate to take over an existing company, so there was a bit of goodwill. It could survive. I wasn't starting something from scratch. It was good that I could give it a good 5 years of building it up before having children, and then now I can kind of. It's still full on, but you've kind of built the business up to a bit where you're sustainable, and now you've just got to make sure that you do take time out for yourself and your family. It's
but not to museums though.
But and I guess the good thing is I'd rather wake up and have a job that I like doing and go to it than wake up and have a job that I hate. So it's not a work-life balance, because my work is life, as sad as that sounds. But I enjoy it, and I also like, as my kids get bigger, they can come and be more involved with it. So I had a trip to Denmark to work with an artist last summer, so I took my eldest son with me, so he came up to Denmark with me, and he spent the day in a studio with the ceramicist, and then the next day we went to Legoland. So, if I can do things like that, that's a great work-life balance.
That's fantastic.
And he had the best memory ever. So I think if you can involve them in that, it doesn't become work-life, it just becomes life.
So there's a very salient message, I think, very important message. So I said in the start of this that obviously I'm trying to do research. There isn't actually a great deal of information really that's out there. So who, in terms of who do you see as your mentor? Who do you look to in this world as the person as the kind of they were the pinnacle of doing. For better phrase, mountain making, but we understand it's more than that.
It wouldn't be anyone within like the mountain making or art world industry, really. I guess people that I found really influential was when I was taking over the company. Clients that I work with, obviously, high-profile individuals, that are directors in themselves of multi-million-pound companies. But through doing the work and collaborating with people, you get talking and they get to know you. So there are a couple of people that knew I was taking over the business, and I think kind of saw a bit of themselves in me. Like, here's a young person that's kind of taking a bit of a risk, and they wanted to help. So I had one guy who was, he probably wouldn't think of himself as a mentor, but he was a guy who was an ex-director of Nestle, so a huge organisation. And he was really nice, because his kind of approach to business was similar to what my approach would be. He had quite nice ethics. Our old director was always kind of, you've got to get 51% out of everyone, and they've only got to get 49%. Whereas I like to split things 50-50. I want my clients to get out of it just as much as I get out of it, the same as my staff. I don't just want to have one job where I make loads of money out of someone and they never use me again. So this guy was very much, the way he approached ordering stuff from us was very much about collaborating and building up business together. And when he heard about me taking over the company, he was really forthcoming with advice and things, and very encouraging about, just do it. Because a lot of us taking over business, you might worry about, and you might think, well, can I do that? What's the tax law for doing that thing? How do I get a license to do this? And there's a lot of red tape and bureaucracy.
And you were younger as well.
Yeah.
Kind of like, so, you know.
But probably more happy to take risks then. But yeah, he was more just like, look, just don't worry about that stuff, just do it, and then you just tackle those things when they come up.
Yeah.
You know, it's not like you've got to have an iron business plan and research everything. You know, just do it and see as you go. You know, so it's quite encouraging just to meet people that are like, yeah, just, you know, even though they're in high profile positions, it wasn't anything magical they had done to get there. They had just, you know, just put the effort in essentially. So yeah.
Again, a very, very good point to make as well. Just coming back to the ethic and the aesthetic, if you like, of what it is you do on a day-to-day basis. I had a question which I wanted to touch on.
Yeah.
Get your thoughts on really more than anything else. This is kind of where we are today with the spaces that are effectively our institutions. And I'm not sure, and this is just purely a question for you really. Have we managed to sort of somehow sleepwalk into that being more important than what's actually inside it?
Yeah.
And you know, the objects that are inside become almost secondary to this design, and I think I asked you that question because of what, you know, going back to those aesthetics and going back to the reason for mount making, and the magic that your industry brings to it as a whole. Is it somehow being drowned by that?
Yeah. I mean, I love a good funky building, and it's you know, it's cool to make these spaces look really different, like nothing you've seen before. And again, these employ great architects and artists to come up with these things. So they are a piece of art within themselves. But there is, you know, an issue, and not even so much in really funky, you know, crazy buildings, just with some of these big museum tenders. You know, you would think that the museum is all about the artwork and the pieces. But it can really easily get overlooked because they give out the mount making tenders, you know, right at the end. And it's like, well, no, you should have involved us from day one, because then we can look at the position and the sizing. I mean, there's so many, almost on every project I've ever worked on, there'll be an item that won't fit in a display case. And it's like, if you had just done this earlier, because, you know, designers are working to a museum curator's object list that might have old outdated measurements on, you know, so why get me at the end to come for every object? It should be at the beginning. And obviously they will get big funding, you know, heritage lottery funding to do a building, but obviously the money and issues, they all add up throughout in any build. But what they're paying for right at the end is usually the mounts, and by that time the budget has become, you know, it's already a bit constrained.
Those who are the project managers, the big companies that take on the base build, that take on the first fit and all that kind of stuff, are not actually. Maybe there is some truth in what I'm asking. They're concentrating more in that.
And
concentrating on what's actually going into that first.
Because you would think the museum is all about the items, but maybe that is less a thing, because if you look at museums these days, and a lot of them, it's more about the experience. You know, the stuff that the V&A is doing with lighting and huge projections. That actually, you know, the audiovisual stuff is becoming bigger and bigger every time I seem to do a project. So there is a bit of a focus more on them. You know, I look at it and think, well, surely the biggest budget should be for the items, because they're the most important thing. But I guess there is this thing now of it being more an experience, and people will pay so much money to go to an exhibition because it's the atmosphere and what it feels like to be in a huge space, which again is great, and I'm all for that, because that is a great experience. But it is sad when you come to the end of a project and, you know, something doesn't, as simple as doesn't fit in a display case, you know, and then they now can't display an item that they've always wanted to, or they have to now display it at a weird angle or something. So yeah, it would just be, you know, I think, getting the project management a bit more right, and understanding the issues that there could be by employing people like us earlier on to prevent these issues, and then it can enhance some of these, you know, crazy architecture.
And you showed me, and I looked at these when you showed me, and I thought, well, these are prime examples really of where the symbiosis, everything seems to come together rather beautifully, but it still is. It's still the object, really. That's the primary reason for you going into that room. Are you proud of these ones?
Yeah. So this was a couple of examples I sent across, because we do framing. Being experts in acrylic, people do contact us, you know, to make acrylic box frames and things like that. So there was a Damien Hirst oil wheel and a circular acrylic frame, which is something that's quite hard to do. So that was great. You know, that's just a really nice acrylic product that fits around that. You know, in talking about sustainability, that should be a frame that's on it forever, and it's going to protect the artwork. You know, the bigger damage and the bigger carbon footprint is if that artwork got damaged than the plastic that surrounds it. And this was a nice one. We did the Shakespeare sale at Christie's many years ago. So these were all the book stands and things that were perfectly shaped to shape and follow the contours of these early Shakespeare folios and original first drafts. And that's brilliant to work on those and get the shape of those. And it was actually one of the first times I think someone had ever written about the mounts on the display. There was a New York Times article about it, and usually they just talk about the exhibition, but there's a small line that said the display was really nice.
Oh no, don't say that, because it goes all the way back to the very first frame again, and you're not allowed to, we're not meant to be looking at that.
That's true, yeah. Maybe they just the room and stuff that I didn't do.
Well, I think we've kind of managed to find ourselves at the other side of yet another wonderful discussion. Does anybody have any questions for Alex over here?
I'd like to know, what's your favourite project?
My favourite project?
What's your favourite project?
If you can say it.
I did do a really cool one that I'm not allowed to talk about, but I will.
Get out.
Yeah, it was for a famous film franchise that makes films about wars in space. So we had, and this actually was a little bit lost on me because I'm not really the biggest fan. But to have some of these original props and things like that, and to actually say that we've seen them and then about them, because they keep it hidden, was pretty cool. To have all these original things. And that would be if you were a fan of someone's like Dream. But I was more excited when a couple of years later they said, "Oh, can you display these other items?" which were from the famous series about an adventurer, which is more my cup of tea. So to have the hat and the whip and the original leather jacket to display, that was pretty cool. Yeah.
That could be an idea.
I think I have with any NDAs I had to sign.
Anybody else?
Is it ever? I'm sure you get clients come in with, like you said, the golden thing, 10 foot in the air, maybe it's a little tacky.
Yeah.
The request might be a little tacky, generally.
Yeah.
And how do you kind of deal with that? That kind of situation?
Yeah, I guess probably I see more things I don't like than I do like. So maybe that's throughout the whole art world anyway. And what's great about the art world, we don't all like the same things.
we reserve judgment.
Yeah. I guess what's interesting, sometimes you do see something that you think is really horrible. And then and sometimes they might give you an idea of how they want it displayed, and you think it's going to be horrible. But then it comes out, and you're like, actually, I really like it. Otherwise you just be like, rather than say you like it, say, oh yeah, it's really interesting. That's the go-to.
One of my favourite phrases I use all the time is going to artist studios and they ask me about the artwork. Interesting.
Yeah. If I say interested, it means I don't like it. If I say it's good, then I like it. And it might be you think it's a nice that I really bad, but then they actually tell you the story or how it's personal to them, and then you're like, right, okay, I wouldn't have that, but I respect you having it. Yeah.
Very good. Well, I think we've had a great hour again. I think it's been fantastic, and if we could all give a great big appreciative thank you to You're very welcome. Thanks so much for coming along. It just leaves me to say that we'll get Philip Smith from Lion Turnbull will be the last one that we'll have in a couple of weeks' time when that happens. So hopefully that will be its own interest. I know some of you guys know him already, so that would be great. But thank you once again. Brilliant.
Thank you.
Cheers.